April 4th, 1954, 3:27 a.m. Detective Frank Sullivan woke up to find Bumpy Johnson sitting in his bedroom eating an apple. Frank went for the gun on his nightstand. It wasn't there. Bumpy held it up, smiled, and set it on the dresser across the room. "Relax, Frank," Bumpy said quietly. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have woken up." Frank's wife was still asleep beside him. His two kids were in rooms down the hall. Bumpy had walked past all of them, through locked doors, past the police-issued security system, into the bedroom of a decorated NYPD detective without making a sound. 7 days earlier, Frank had beaten a 20-year-old black woman named Sarah Mitchell so badly she'd lost her unborn child. Sarah had been walking home from her nursing shift at Harlem Hospital. Frank stopped her, accused her of prostitution with zero evidence, and when she protested, he dragged her into an alley and beat her unconscious. Bumpy had given Frank 1 week to apologize publicly, resign from the force, and leave New York forever. Instead, Frank had laughed it off. What's some gangster gonna do to a cop? Now, Bumpy was sitting 3 feet away, and Frank understood exactly what was about to happen. But what happened in that bedroom over the next 11 minutes didn't just destroy Frank Sullivan's life. It sent shockwaves through the NYPD and made the Italian mob families realize Bumpy Johnson had reach they'd never imagined. To understand how Bumpy turned an untouchable dirty cop into a cautionary tale, you need to know why Frank Sullivan thought he could beat a pregnant woman in Harlem and get away with it. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Frank Sullivan was in 1954. Frank was a 15-year veteran of the NYPD, decorated, respected. He'd made detective at 32 years old, one of the youngest in the department. He worked in the 32nd Precinct, which covered most of Harlem. On paper, Frank was a hero cop. He'd solved 3 murder cases, testified in dozens of trials. The newspapers loved him. Detective Sullivan, Harlem's guardian angel, ran in the Daily News in 1952. But in Harlem, Frank Sullivan was known by a different name, the Devil in Blue. Frank was a shakedown artist. He'd stop black business owners and demand protection money. He'd plant drugs on innocent people and demand bribes to make charges disappear. He'd beat suspects in custody and claim they resisted arrest. And he targeted women. Frank had a pattern. He'd stop black women walking alone at night, accuse them of prostitution, threaten arrest, then demand sexual favors or cash to let them go. Between 1950 and 1954, at least 17 women filed complaints against Frank Sullivan. Every complaint disappeared. Frank had protection. His captain, Lieutenant Edward Morrison, buried the paperwork. The police union backed him. The district attorney's office refused to prosecute. Frank Sullivan was untouchable. Bumpy Johnson had been watching Frank for 3 years. Bumpy paid informants inside the NYPD. He knew about the complaints. He knew about the shakedowns. He knew Frank was a predator hiding behind a badge. But Bumpy operated by rules. He didn't move against cops unless they crossed a line. Corruption was one thing. Violence on innocent people was another. On March 28, 1954, Frank Sullivan crossed that line. Sarah Mitchell was 20 years old. She'd grown up in Harlem, put herself through nursing school, working 2 jobs. She was 7 months pregnant, engaged to a construction worker named David who'd proposed on Christmas Eve. Sarah worked the overnight shift at Harlem Hospital. She'd finish at 2 a.m. and walk 12 blocks home to her apartment on 141st Street. Same route every night. Safe neighborhood. She knew everyone. On March 28th, Frank Sullivan was working late. He'd been drinking. He saw Sarah walking alone.
He pulled his patrol car alongside her. "You, stop." Sarah stopped. She recognized Frank. Everyone in Harlem knew Detective Sullivan. "What's your name?" Frank asked. "Sarah Mitchell, sir." "Where you coming from this time of night?" "Work. I'm a nurse at Harlem Hospital." Frank got out of the car. He walked around her slowly. "Nurses don't walk around at 2 a.m. You working a different kind of job?" "I just told you." "Don't lie to me," Frank said. "Prostitution is illegal. I'm taking you in." Sarah's heart raced. "I'm not a prostitute. I'm a nurse. I have my hospital ID right here." She reached for her purse. Frank grabbed her wrist. "Resisting arrest." "I'm not resisting. I'm pregnant." Frank didn't care. He twisted her arm behind her back and slammed her against the patrol car. Sarah screamed. Frank punched her in the ribs. Once, twice. She collapsed. Frank dragged her into a nearby alley. He kicked her while she was on the ground. Stomach, back, ribs. Sarah begged him to stop, told him about her baby. Frank kicked her again. When he finally stopped, Sarah was unconscious. Frank left her in the alley and drove away. A delivery driver found Sarah at 3:17 a.m. He called an ambulance. Sarah woke up at Harlem Hospital 6 hours later. Her baby was dead. The doctors told her what happened. The trauma had caused a miscarriage. Her fiancé David sat beside her bed, crying. Sarah told the nurses who did this. They wrote it down. They called the police to file a report. The responding officers worked in Frank Sullivan's precinct. They took the report and buried it. But someone at the hospital called Bumpy Johnson. By noon on March 28th, Bumpy knew everything.
Frank Sullivan heard about Sarah's accusations and laughed them off. He was sitting in a bar on Amsterdam Avenue when his partner, Officer Jimmy Keene, told him hospital had called it in. "She's saying you beat her," Jimmy said nervously. Frank took a sip of whiskey. "She resisted arrest. I subdued her. That's my job." "Frank, she lost her baby." "Not my problem," Frank said. "She shouldn't have been walking around at 2 a.m. acting suspicious." Jimmy looked uncomfortable. "The hospital staff is backing her story, and word is Bumpy Johnson is asking questions." Frank laughed. "Bumpy Johnson, the numbers guy? What's he gonna do? Threaten me with math?" Frank had dealt with Bumpy before. Small interactions. Bumpy ran illegal gambling. Frank occasionally demanded payoffs to look the other way. Bumpy always paid. Frank saw him as just another criminal who understood cops had the real power. "I'm serious, Frank," Jimmy said. "People are saying Bumpy's pissed, like really pissed." "Let him be pissed," Frank said. "I'm a decorated NYPD detective. He's a gangster. If he touches me, the entire department comes down on Harlem. He's not that stupid." Frank finished his drink and went home feeling invincible. The next day, March 29th, a man approached Frank outside the precinct. The man was well-dressed, calm. He handed Frank an envelope. "What's this?" Frank asked. "Message from Bumpy Johnson," the man said. Frank opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper with typed words. "You have 7 days to do 3 things. Apologize publicly to Sarah Mitchell, resign from the NYPD, leave New York. If you do these things, you walk away with your life. If you don't, you won't make it to day 8. Bumpy Johnson." Frank read it twice. Then he laughed. He crumpled the paper and threw it at the messenger's feet. "Tell Bumpy Johnson to go fuck himself," Frank said. "I'm not apologizing to some lying whore. I'm not resigning, and I'm not going anywhere. If he wants me, tell him to come get me."
The messenger picked up the crumpled paper, smoothed it out, and walked away without another word. Frank went back inside the precinct and told the story to everyone in the break room. His fellow cops laughed. "Bumpy Johnson thinks he can threaten a cop? That guy's got balls, I'll give him that. Frank Sullivan spent the next 7 days doing exactly nothing. He didn't apologize, he didn't resign. He went to work, he went home to his wife and kids in Queens. He lived his life like nothing happened. He told his captain about the threat. Captain Morrison assigned extra patrols near Frank's house, just in case. Frank felt safe, protected, surrounded by fellow officers who'd back him up. What Frank didn't know was that Bumpy had already decided he was a dead man. The 7-day warning wasn't mercy, it was a test. Bumpy wanted to see if Frank had any honor left, any decency, any willingness to face consequences. Frank failed the test. And on April 4th at 3:27 a.m., Bumpy Johnson collected.
Bumpy spent the 7 days preparing. He didn't rush, didn't panic. He studied Frank Sullivan like a scientist studies a specimen. He learned Frank's schedule, woke up at 6 a.m., left for work at 7:15 a.m., stopped at the same diner for coffee, worked until 6 p.m., went to a bar on Amsterdam Avenue 3 nights a week, home by 9 p.m., asleep by 11 p.m. He learned Frank's address, a 2-story house in Bayside, Queens, wife named Margaret, 2 kids, Frank Jr., age 9, and Emily, age 6. The house had an alarm system, police issued, standard locks, a dog in the backyard. He learned Frank's connections. Captain Morrison provided cover. The police union would defend him. The district attorney's office wouldn't touch him without overwhelming evidence. Frank Sullivan was protected by a system designed to shield bad cops. But Bumpy understood something Frank didn't. Systems have cracks. On April 1st, Bumpy made a visit to Captain Edward Morrison's mistress. Her name was Angela. She lived in an apartment on the Upper East Side that Morrison paid for. Morrison's wife didn't know about her. Bumpy knocked on Angela's door at 4 p.m. She answered, confused. "Who are you?" "A friend," Bumpy said. "I need you to deliver a message to Captain Morrison." "I don't know any." Bumpy held up a photograph. Morrison and Angela together at a restaurant in Brooklyn, holding hands, kissing. Angela went pale. "What do you want?" "Tell Morrison that if Frank Sullivan isn't held accountable for what he did to Sarah Mitchell, these photos go to his wife, his boss, and the Daily News." Angela took the photos with shaking hands. That evening, Captain Morrison received the message. He called Bumpy's known associate and negotiated. "What do you want?" "I want Morrison to stay out of this," Bumpy said through his intermediary. "Whatever happens to Frank Sullivan, Morrison doesn't interfere. No extra patrols, no investigations, no protection." "And if I refuse?" Morrison asked. "Then your career ends and your marriage ends. Your choice." Morrison agreed. The extra patrols around Frank's house disappeared on April 2nd. On April 3rd, Bumpy visited an old friend named Thomas Reed. Thomas was a locksmith, former Army engineer. He'd served in World War II, disarming bombs and breaking into enemy facilities. He owed Bumpy a favor from 1949 when Bumpy paid for his daughter's medical treatment. "I need to get inside a house," Bumpy said. "Alarm system, standard police locks, without making noise." Thomas nodded. "When?" "Tomorrow night."
Thomas handed Bumpy a set of tools and a diagram. "Here's what you do." On April 4th at 2:47 a.m., Bumpy Johnson drove to Bayside, Queens. He parked 3 blocks from Frank Sullivan's house. He walked through backyards, avoiding streetlights. At 3:04 a.m., he reached Frank's back door. He used Thomas's tools, disabled the alarm in 43 seconds, picked the lock in 22 seconds, opened the door without a sound. The dog in the backyard didn't bark. Bumpy had spent 3 nights feeding it treats through the fence. The dog recognized him. Bumpy walked through the kitchen, past the living room,
up the stairs, past the kids' bedrooms, into Frank and Margaret's bedroom. He sat down in the chair by the window, took an apple from his pocket, and waited. At 3:27 a.m., Frank Sullivan's eyes opened. Frank stared at Bumpy for 5 seconds before his brain processed what he was seeing. Then he lunged for his gun. Gone. Bumpy held it up. "Looking for this?" Frank's wife stirred beside him, still asleep. Frank froze, terrified she'd wake up. "Don't move," Bumpy said quietly. "Don't speak loud. Your kids are down the hall. Let's keep this between us." Frank's mouth was dry. His heart pounded. "How did you—" "Doesn't matter," Bumpy interrupted. "What matters is you had 7 days to do the right thing. You didn't." "I'm a cop," Frank whispered. "You kill me, the whole department—" "I'm not gonna kill you," Bumpy said calmly. "That would be too easy." Frank didn't understand. "Then why are you here?" Bumpy leaned forward. "I'm here to show you something. You thought your badge made you untouchable. You thought your captain, your union, your system would protect you. I'm here to prove you're wrong." Bumpy took out a folder. He opened it and spread photographs across Frank's lap. Frank looked down. His face went white. The photos showed everything. Frank taking cash from business owners, Frank planting drugs on a teenager, Frank dragging Sarah Mitchell into the alley, Frank kicking her while she was on the ground. "Where did you—" "I have eyes everywhere, Frank," Bumpy said. "Every dirty thing you've done for the last 3 years, documented, dated, witnessed." "Those won't hold up in court," Frank said desperately. "I'm not taking you to court," Bumpy said. "I'm taking you somewhere worse." Bumpy pulled out another envelope. Inside were copies of the photos, along with a typed confession detailing every crime Frank had committed, names, dates, locations. "Tomorrow morning, these go to 3 places: the New York Times, the Amsterdam News, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Your captain can't bury this. Your union can't defend this. Your career ends by lunchtime." Frank was shaking now. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Bumpy stood up. He walked to Frank's dresser and picked up a framed photo of Frank's family. "Nice kids. They're gonna grow up knowing their father was a monster who beat a pregnant woman and killed her baby."
"Don't bring my family into this," Frank hissed. "You brought them into this when you didn't apologize," Bumpy said. "You had 7 days to take responsibility, to face consequences like a man. You chose to hide." Bumpy set the photo down. He walked back to the chair. "Here's what's going to happen," Bumpy said. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to walk into your captain's office and resign. You're going to go to Harlem Hospital and apologize to Sarah Mitchell in front of witnesses. And then you're going to leave New York forever." "And if I don't?" Frank asked. Bumpy smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. "Then these photos go public. You get arrested. You go to trial. And while you're sitting in a cell waiting for your trial, every criminal you ever arrested will know where you are. How long you think you'll last in Rikers Island, Frank?" Frank knew the answer. He'd sent dozens of men to Rikers. Cops didn't survive there. "You're giving me the same choice you gave me a week ago," Frank said bitterly. "No," Bumpy corrected. "A week ago, I gave you a chance to walk away with dignity. Now you walk away with nothing but your life. And you're lucky I'm even offering that." Frank looked at his sleeping wife, at the photos of his kids. "Why didn't you just kill me?" Frank asked quietly. "Because I want you to live with what you did."
Bumpy said. "I want you to wake up every day knowing you destroyed a woman's life, killed her baby, and got away with it because you wore a badge. I want that guilt to eat you alive." Bumpy stood up. He placed Frank's gun back on the dresser. "Tomorrow, Frank, you resign, you apologize, you leave, or I bury you." Bumpy walked to the door. He stopped and looked back. "Oh, and Frank, if you ever come back to New York, if you ever put on another badge anywhere, if you ever hurt another innocent person, I'll find you again, and next time I won't be this generous." Bumpy left the room, down the stairs, out the back door, into the night. Frank sat in his bed, surrounded by photos of his crimes, and realized Bumpy Johnson had just destroyed his entire life without firing a single shot.
April 5th, 1954, 9:14 a.m. Frank Sullivan walked into Captain Morrison's office and placed his badge and gun on the desk. "I'm resigning," Frank said. Morrison looked shocked. "What? Why?" "Personal reasons," Frank said flatly. "Frank, you're one of my best detectives." "It's done," Frank interrupted. He turned and walked out. At 11:30 a.m., Frank showed up at Harlem Hospital. He asked to see Sarah Mitchell. The nurses were confused but let him in. Sarah was still recovering. Her fiancé, David, sat beside her bed. Frank stood in the doorway. He looked broken. "I'm sorry," Frank said, his voice cracked. "I'm sorry for what I did to you. I was wrong. I'm resigning from the police force. I'm leaving New York. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to hear it." Sarah stared at him. Tears ran down her face. "You killed my baby." "I know," Frank said, "and I'll live with that for the rest of my life." He left without waiting for a response. By 2 p.m., Frank Sullivan had loaded his family into a car and left New York. They moved to Ohio. Frank never worked in law enforcement again. He took a job as a night security guard at a warehouse. He drank himself to sleep most nights. His wife divorced him in 1957. His kids stopped speaking to him by 1960. Frank Sullivan died in 1973 at age 52, alone, broken, haunted by what he'd done. But the story didn't end with Frank's departure. The Italian mob families heard what happened. A decorated NYPD detective had resigned and fled New York overnight. No explanation, no scandal, just gone. Then rumors started spreading. Bumpy Johnson had done it. Bumpy had gotten into a cop's house in Queens, walked past alarms and patrols, sat in the man's bedroom while he slept. Meyer Lansky heard the story and called Bumpy directly. "Did you really break into a cop's house?" Lansky asked. "I visited a man who needed reminding about consequences," Bumpy replied. Lansky laughed. "You're crazier than I thought, but you've got everyone's attention now. The families are asking questions." "Let them ask," Bumpy said. Frank Costello called a meeting with his captains 3 days later. "Bumpy Johnson just ran a decorated cop out of New York," Costello said. "No violence, no publicity, no heat. He walked into the man's house and made him quit. That's the kind of power we respect." From that day forward, the Italian families treated Bumpy differently, not as a subordinate, not as competition, as an equal. Sarah Mitchell eventually recovered physically. She married David in 1955. They had 3 children together. She worked as a nurse for 43 years. In 1965, she gave an interview to the Amsterdam News about dirty cops. She mentioned that someone had made Frank Sullivan face consequences when the system wouldn't. "I don't know who," she said, "but whoever it was gave me justice when the law refused to."
Everyone in Harlem knew who she was talking about. Here's what this proved. Bumpy Johnson understood something most people never learn. Real power isn't about violence, it's about leverage. Frank Sullivan thought his badge made him untouchable. He thought the system protecting him was stronger than one man from Harlem. He was wrong. Bumpy didn't fight the system, he went around it. He found the cracks, Captain Morrison's mistress, the lack of patrols, the unlocked alarm system, the documented evidence of every crime Frank had committed. And then Bumpy did something brilliant. He gave Frank the same choice twice. The first time, Bumpy offered dignity. Frank refused. The second time, Bumpy offered survival. Frank took it. That's strategy. Killing Frank would have been easy. It would have been satisfying, but it would have brought heat, federal investigations, NYPD retaliation, war. Instead, Bumpy made Frank destroy himself, resign, apologize, disappear. No martyrdom, no sympathy, just a dirty cop running away with his tail between his legs. And the message it sent was more powerful than any bullet. Bumpy Johnson can reach you anywhere, badge or no badge, system or no system. If you cross the line, he'll find you. That's why the mob families started treating him as an equal, because they recognized genius when they saw it. If this story got you hyped, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button right now. Drop a like if you respect how Bumpy handled this. We're telling the real Bumpy Johnson stories that prove intelligence beats everything. Let me know in the comments, should Bumpy have just killed Frank Sullivan, or was making him live with his guilt the better punishment? I want to hear what you think. Next week, we're breaking down the night Bumpy Johnson walked into Malcolm X's rally at the Audubon Ballroom in 1963 and warned him about an assassination attempt 48 hours before it happened. What Malcolm did with that warning changed history. Until then, remember, power isn't about how much violence you can inflict. It's about how smart you are with leverage. And Bumpy Johnson was a master.